It's Pride Month and I have some book recs, so let's talk about them. Happy Pride Month. I am excited to have my first full book recommendations video. I thought for this I would try to have create a selection of book recommendations that are sci-fi, fantasy, speculative, in some way, queer, LGBTQIA plus, rainbow under the umbrella books. Now, these are going to count whether the author identifies as queer in some fashion and or the characters in the book, the world itself, is queer in some fashion. For the most part, I think almost all of these books, the world, characters, etc. in the books themselves are queer. So there's no real order to this other than putting it into categories. So I have fantasy, I have sci-fi, and then I have a third nebulous category for everything that is speculative but doesn't quite neatly fit into sci-fi or fantasy. There's no order for the books. It's literally just the order that I plopped down in the pile that I have here. And what I did for this was I was starting to get to a point where my Rex list was too unwieldy. So I decided, you know what, I'm keeping it to books I actually physically own and have in my house. So that made it easier, made it a lot more streamlined. This video is not gonna be 500 hours long. And most of the time, the books that I keep are books that I really enjoyed, so I can recommend them a lot easier. So let's start with fantasy. Got my fantasy pile here. You can't see it, but there's a lot of good books here in this pile. So we'll start with the first one in the pile, which is Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennet, and actually the entire trilogy, the entire Founders trilogy, which is complete. This features main character Sancha, who is queer. She is attracted to women. There is a sapphic romance throughout the entirety of the trilogy. And this is a really great hard magic fantasy. I think Robert Jackson Bennet has such an incredible mind for world building. And now that I'm thinking about it, I actually do have a second one. Okay, the pile just went, but The Tainted Cup, also by Robert Jackson Bennet. So these books have such a creative world that they are set in. Foundryside to me really was an incredible way for creating a magic system to set up this world that just kind of evolves and grows and gets absolutely crazy. And thinking back on it, what book 1 was like and what I remember book 3 was like, it's crazy how the world and characters and magic all evolves. So Foundryside is really great. The romance, it's not front and center, a huge part of it, but it is a big part of Sancha as a character. And then The Tainted Cup. The main character Djinn. So this is a Holmes and Watson-esque fantasy, Holmes and Watson-esque mystery set in a fantasy world. Now, the mystery plot, the mystery solving is more at the forefront. It just happens to be set in an incredibly fantastical world, which is really cool. It's set in this world where this land has been ravaged by essentially what are kaiju attacks, sort of a cross between the kaiju from Pacific Rim with Attack on Titan. And because of the years and hundreds of years of these Titans coming, they come from the ocean, they make landfall, they try to go in, and they're killed before they get too far in to damage, the land and the people. And this changes the scope of the type of magic that can be used, that is created. A lot of this world is based in plant magic, and the characters, our main character Djinn, he is one of them. Some of them use that magic to enhance their bodies, so he is enhanced in a way where he can inhale a scent and then remember every single thing that he ever saw, heard, felt, touched, etc. Djinn himself is queer. It is very minor. I will have to say that it is very minor, but it is treated as queer norm. And he also has, it's not specifically stated as dyslexia because it's a fantasy world, but he has dyslexia. So I really enjoyed this in Foundryside. I just love Robert Jackson Bennet. So 2 highly recommended 5-star books from me. Next is The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is a fantasy, sort of maybe sci-fi-esque. I've only read this first book in the trilogy. I don't know how much it changes along the way, but this is set in a world where in the past these eldritch, steampunky beings like used to rule, and they all died off, and this character is sort of like a archaeologist type who is studying, you know, the carcasses of these beings. Then we also have this race of vampire elves, essentially, who are dying off. And then we have, if I remember, a character who essentially is kind of a nun, and her animal companion is a big bat that she rides. Yeah, so a lot of fun stuff happening in this. It is queer norm, and it's been a while since I've read this one, so I can't tell you exactly how much at the forefront any of the queerness or the romance in any aspect is, but I do remember it being just absolutely queer norm and really great. So I think I actually am going to reread this pretty soon because I own the rest of the trilogy and I want to finish it out. It's one of my series goals this year is to finish this trilogy finally. So The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams is a suggestion. If you've watched my last 2 videos, I've been raving about this, The Spear Cuts Through Water by Jimenez. Right now, it stands at my #1 best book of this entire year. It is, the basic story is these 2 young warriors have to help this elderly goddess across the land in order to overthrow the tyrannic monarchy that is in place. That is the basic baseline, what I can tell you what is happening in this. Everything else around it, the storytelling devices, the character work, the world building, it's just incredible. I am going to do a standalone review for this because I can't not talk about it, but this is incredible. And the 2 main warriors, Kima and June, I blanked on their names for a second. June and Kima, there is a tension sort of blossoming something between them. I won't say it's a romance, don't go in this expecting a full-on like romance happening, but there is tension. They are both men who fall for each other, I guess you could say. So yes, The Spear Cuts Through Water by Jimenez. One of the best things I've read this year, absolutely, bar none. Next we have A Master of Djinn by Djèlí Clark. So this is the first novel in a universe, an alternate historical fantasy universe. He wrote a couple of short stories and novellas based in this universe before this novel came out. And essentially in 1910s, 1920s-ish Egypt, the Djinn started coming out and imbuing Egypt with power, and it changes the dynamics of the world powers. So there are angels, it's steampunky, there are Djinn, and in the midst of all this is our main character, Fatima El Sha'arawi. Fatima is a investigator for, like a paranormal investigator, and she has to solve a mystery in this one. So it's, Djèlí Clark has an amazing mind for ideas. I love the world that he has built here. I think for me personally, this novel felt like it went a tiny bit too long, and I loved his short stories and the novellas already set in this world, so I think my expectations were a little too high. But I enjoyed this one, and I highly recommend it if you want like a different vein of fantasy, mystery. You know, this alternate history fantasy set in 1920s-ish Cairo, where Egypt has magic and Egypt is a power. So highly recommend A Master of Djinn by Djèlí Clark. Oh, and Fatima is in a sapphic romance. So there's that. And then last of the fantasy is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I feel like I don't really have to push this a lot because it has received all of the acclaim that it deserves. And essentially this is, so people want to say it's a Mulan retelling, and I guess at the very face of it, it is about a girl who pretends to be a man and joins an army and gains power. That's as Mulan as it is. But it's just great. It reads as historical fiction, and there are fantastical elements, but I would say the historical fiction is more at the forefront. Now, the queerness of it does involve a lot of talk of gender identity, and not just in terms of the main character pretending to be a man, but there is another character. I forget his name. We do get his point of view at some point, but he is dealing with gender identity in terms of not being a man the way that masculinity is supposed to be presented in this world. So very good, incredible. I do have the second book here, He Who Drowned the World, and I have to say they are perfectly, like, this is a perfect duology in terms of like the way the books are created. Like, there's no crazy changing of the type of the book, the font, you know, so they just like, it's like yin and yang essentially. Like, look at that, like the world, she who, the colors inverted. Ugh, it's just, sorry, I had to go on a tangent because I love that. But yeah, She Who Became the Sun. I really loved this and I highly recommend it. So that's all the fantasy. Let's move on to the sci-fi. Okay, trying to speed through this. I'm racing with the sun setting. So, okay, so in sci-fi, first thing I'm going to kick off with is The Mimicking of Unknown Successes and The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles by Malka Older. This is a novella series featuring two characters. This is another, much like The Tainted Cup, this is a Holmes and Watson-esque mystery where it's these two women who were college friends slash maybe lovers, and they reunite later as Masa is the Holmes-ish character, is an investigator, and her investigation in the first book brings her back to the university where Platy, or am I doing that right? Masa, yes, Platy is she's basically studying at the university. She's kind of like a grad student-ish, I would say. So essentially this takes place on a colony that is surrounding, that is a colony of Jupiter, essentially, you know, surrounding Jupiter. The world building in this is really great. There's I wouldn't say this is cozy in the like cozy mystery sense so much as it's cozy in the sense that this is very warm and very Holmes and Watson, so it's very familiar, I'll put it that way. Even with the world building set on, you know, this colony, you know, the science, whatever, it's a very familiar feeling as I was reading this. So I really love this series. It's really great. Give the first book 5 stars, second book 4.5 stars. Highly recommend it if you're looking for a mystery that leans more on the cozier side, but with some really great world building and a sapphic romance at the heart of it. So they do get together in the first book, and the second book, it continues on as they try to navigate what it means for them to be together again after all this time. So that is The Mimicking of Unknown Successes by Malka Older and The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles. Okay, next I have Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandela. This is a short novella. This is a story about, I would say near future story about a scientist who has created this sort of neural net that allows her to mentally link with a wolf. I think if I remember right, the wolves are I can't remember if the wolves are going extinct or not, but the main character, Sean, she is able to link with this wolf who is part of a wolf pack, and she begins to kind of lose herself in that work. And Sean is also dealing with a marriage that is imploding. So it's not just about the wolf and the neural network. This is very heavily about Sean's personal life imploding as she gets more and more obsessed with the work, and the work makes her personal life worse, and then when her personal life gets worse, she delves more into her work. So it's a vicious cycle that she's in. I really loved this. It really stuck with me when I read it, and there's something about you, usually that sort of like personal life, detached, self-sabotage kind of story doesn't really work for me, but it really worked for me here. There's a lot of theming and metaphor work that was really doing it for me here. So I highly recommend this. It's a very short novella. It was very interesting, and I wouldn't say it is a happy ending, but it is an ending that makes sense for the characters and where they are in their lives. So Feed Them Silence by Lee Mandello. Next, recently read this. This is Floating Hotel by Grace Curtis. This is a, how to say? I wouldn't say it's not a murder mystery. It's not a cozy. It's essentially following this cruise hotel spaceship that goes on a route and people stay on it like a hotel. And essentially we are following characters who are on this hotel. We're following the crew, we're following customers, and as we get each of their points of view, it does feel a little bit like it is short stories that are linked in this world, but each story is highly linked, like more vignettes of characters that are existing within the broader framework of this story that is being told. As we get each new character's section, their point of view, we learn more about the story that is going on. We learn more about the backstory of this world. And I remember after maybe the first 2 or 3 stories, I was like, oh, this is doing a lot more than I expected. I was just expecting something cozy-ish because this is being comped to Becky Chambers, so I was expecting something a lot more warm and character interconnected the way The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is, but I would pause, and I would not really recommend this if you're looking exactly for that Becky Chambers Long Way to a Small Angry Planet feel. You're not going to get that here. You are going to get characters who exist together and are kind of like a found family, but they're not as connected and found family-ish as you would find in a Becky Chambers. And this is very strongly also, it is character driven, but it is also very strongly plot driven at the same time. So there is a very strong plot that is happening. So I loved it. I loved it for what it was. Once I understood what it was doing, I was all in. Ended up being like a great read for me. So and queer norm. It's just queer norm throughout the whole thing. So that is Floating Hotel by Grace Curtis, and I love this cover. So love this book, love this cover. Very pretty. Okay. Next, also read this year. This is These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. This is not getting anywhere near a fraction of the attention that I think it deserves. This is a crazy space opera. It is about these characters, this incredible world building. I can't even begin to describe. Like, it's just like there are these factions that rule in certain types of the universe, very conglomerate, capitalist factions. And there is this woman who gains something that could destroy one faction, and people from that faction are sent to hunt her down. So we have June Ironway as the thief. We have Chono and Essek who are tasked to hunt June down. And then we have this character called Six who is tied to all 3 of them in some way. And it's just like, it's a cat and mouse game between all these characters. And even as we have the main story where they are chasing June down, we're following all 3 of them. Six doesn't really get their own constant POV the way the other 3 do. But Six is deeply ingrained in the history of all 3 of them. And we are getting, there is like a past timeline that will catch up to the timeline here. And it's just, it's brilliant. I think it's really brilliant in how the character work is laid out in this fast-paced, adventure-ish, cat and mouse game. As the character work went on, I was just like, oh, this is good. It builds on the character work builds on the world building. The character work opens up the world, and the characters are all great. And I have to say, the character of Isek stuck with me. Isek is a fucking horrible person, and I loved her. It's hard to admit that, or not hard to admit that, but it's weird to admit that. But I loved hating them. I loved being in their head and seeing exactly how like everything that was going on, the way their mind worked and all of that. It was fantastic. So highly recommend these Burning Stars. It is in like my favorites of the year so far. So and that is by Bethany Jacobs, and it is fully queer norm. June is actually in a sapphic relationship, a long-term sapphic relationship. So these Burning Stars, I think everyone should give this a try. It deserves more love. Like, it's just been completely slept on. What can I say? Next, that's not sci-fi. Okay. The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I've already talked about him in fantasy. This was his first novel. This is sci-fi, and it's not as complex as The Spear Cuts Through Water, but it is still also very it is complex in the way that it is dealing with characters and the world building, but it's not as intricately woven as The Spear Cuts Through Water. This is a little bit more straightforward than that. It has found family themes. It has themes of, you know, discussing capitalism, even in far future space. The way capitalism uses us up until we have nothing left to give, and how people try to find comfort and relationships and family in that sort of unrelenting world. So I really enjoyed this. It is not the happiest book ever. Did break my heart a little bit, but it's so worth it. And between this and The Spear Cuts Through Water, Simon Jimenez is now just auto-buy, auto-read. I will do whatever he comes out with, whatever he's writing, I'm there 100%. So The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. Okay, This Is How You Lose the Time War. I just reread this. I love this story. It is a sci-fi short novel, epistolary novel about these two agents, Red and Blue, who are on opposite sides of a war between two factions who are trying to control and change timelines, alternate universes, so that the war in the far future goes their way, and they go back and forth. And they start writing letters to each other, and they fall in love. So that is very simplified, but the creative thing about this is how the world is expanded upon as we learn about each letter. It's literally not just a letter being written. It's like a letter is written in the grooves of the whorls of a tree as it grew over thousands of years. A letter is written in poisonous berries, and one character has to eat each berry and get more like a letter in their brain as they do. Just stuff like that. So it's great. It's really great. It's a great romance, a sapphic romance. And I love it. I recommend it so much. So This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Motar and Max Gladstone. Next is The Genesis of Misery by Neon Yang. I wasn't sure about this at first. Actually, when I first got it, I started reading it and I enjoyed what I was reading, and then I read a little more, and then I was like, oh no, I am so not down for what is happening right now. So I put it down, basically paused it, and when I picked it up about 6 months later, devoured it. So Neon Yang is a non-binary Singaporean author, and this story is a take on Joan of Arc, where this character Misery thinks she is going insane, hears what is similarly to Joan of Arc, a voice in her head. She thinks she's going insane, and essentially, as far as I remember, like people believe that she is an important figure for some reason, and she thinks that she has to go along with what she believes is a delusion. So she goes along further and further into all these political machinations, just kind of gets dragged along as things go forward, and it just gets more and more intense as you try to figure out, okay, is she crazy or is this actually happening? And as you can see back here, it looks a little weird, but there is kind of like space mech-ish kind of stuff going on. Very interesting world building. So highly recommend this. It is a very weird book. I think if you're not into it in a couple of chapters, that is pretty indicative of what the book is like. And I have seen people completely bounce off of this. I have seen people absolutely love it. I am on the side of loving it. So I recommend it. I think it deserves a little bit more love, but I can understand if it's not for you. So The Genesis of Misery by Neon Young. It is queer norm, and Neon Young is a non-binary author. Okay, lastly, this one's a little obvious, but Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. It's a gay sci-fi opera, gay romance, sci-fi, gay romance, sci-fi space opera. Essentially slow burn romance where these two characters, if I remember, it is a marriage of convenience, and they end up falling for each other as political machinations and stuff happen. So I enjoyed this one. If I remember right, this is actually, it started as fan fiction, and if I remember right, it is Finn and Poe from Star Wars fan fiction. I think that's this one. I think knowing that, it didn't really detract from anything. I wasn't like seeing anything that was, oh, this is obviously Finn and this is obviously Poe. So it didn't detract from that. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a good time, and I would recommend it if all you're looking for is a fantasy, not a fantasy, sci-fi romance in the vein of like romantasy. But it's well written, lots of fun, good plotting, good world building. So I recommend this one. Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. So that's sci-fi, and we're going to move on to the catch-all basic speculative fiction next. Okay, we're in the home stretch. I am almost completely lost the natural sunlight, so I hope this light over here is okay. Okay, so basic catch-all speculative fiction in whatever form that comes in. So first is Siren Queen by Nevo. Nevo is one of my favorite authors. She is an auto-read author for me. Loved Siren Queen. This is a historical, alternate historical fantasy. This is set in the golden age of cinema, you know, the 1930s, 40s-ish. And this main character, it's set in a world where fae kind of exist, deals with demons. She ends up getting into the movies and, you know, being Asian, she is endlessly exoticized and othered, and eventually she realizes, she's like, you know what, if they're gonna other me, I'm gonna be a fucking monster. And she becomes like this famous starlet who is a monster in these movies. But it's like set in this world where the way that the studios and execs treated actors and actresses and crew back in the golden age, the classical age of film, when film was starting out, that is given literal life here, where there are demons, there are blood debts, they are literally making deals with monsters to get big stories and films and, success. So our main character walks into this world with her eyes open, and it's wonderful. Oh no. I think the AC is turning on. Oh, okay. I gotta wait for that to stop because that's a little loud, so I'll be back. Okay, completely lost my train of thought because of the AC kicking on. I had to wait for it. I'm right under a vent, so it's very loud. But yes, so Siren Queen by Nevo. Our main character is a lesbian. It's, as far as I remember, romance is not a big important part of it, but there are romantic entanglements. So fantasy, alternate history, historical fantasy, highly recommended. Nevo is one of my favorite authors writing right now, and I can't, speak the world of her. So that was Siren Queen. Next is The Surviving Sky by Kritika H. Rao. I guess you could put, the reason I have this in this catch-all, speculative category is that it's sci-fantasy. It's sci-fi with fantasy elements. It's climate fiction, essentially in the world, maybe the future. I'm not sure exactly when, where it's set, but humanity, the world, the earth is covered by these storms that rage all over the world, and humanity developed, people developed powers that allowed them to control plant life. So they created these floating cities in the sky with plants, and the people who can control, whatever magic it is that allows them to control the plants, they have a higher status in this world. And we follow our main character, Ahilia. Ahilia is the wife to Erevan, who is one of these people who can control the city, and their marriage is on the rocks. That is one of the things about this that is a little complicated in terms of saying whether I really enjoyed it or whether it was a hit or miss, because it is daring to center two main characters whose marriage is falling apart in a story like this. At times, I thought it was great storytelling, and at times I was just incredibly annoyed by the two of them and just basically how they acted with, around, and to each other. But the problem is their marriage is failing because they're terrible communicators, and that can be frustrating when you're reading it, but it is on purpose. There's a point to it. It's not miscommunication because a plot needs to happen. It's miscommunication because this married couple are like, they're falling apart. One thing about that though is that I don't think I ever really believed that they love each other. So like it's back and forth on whether that really works, but the story as a whole, the world building, everything, this really worked for me. This does draw from Indian, Hindu mythology and stuff like that. So the ending didn't quite work for me, but that was mainly because I am a reader who doesn't really visualize stuff well, so the ending was really hard for me to parse. It happened very quickly. The pacing on this was off, but I keep saying all this stuff, but this is such an interesting world that has been created. It's a very interesting character choices, and I do want to recommend this because it's different from what is being published right now. It's interesting. I enjoyed it. I still gave it 4 stars, even with some of the issues I had, because I really enjoyed the world building and the story being told here. So that is The Surviving Sky by Kritika H. Rao, and this cover is fantastic. Just kind of want to get that a little bit. So yeah. What's next? Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. This is horror. The main character is, I think she's like 19-ish. This essentially centers this Camp Damascus, which is a gay conversion camp, and she lives outside of it. She is in an evangelical cult, essentially. She's kind of drawn to Camp Damascus, and as the story unfolds, we learn more about why that is. She is autistic. I don't know that it's a spoiler to say this, but she is gay. So we follow her as she unravels, the mystery behind Camp Damascus and why she is so drawn to it. So really great horror novel from Chuck Tingle, he of the Pounded in the Butt by My Own Butt. So. Next I have Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a historical noir feeling fantasy mystery novel with a sapphic romance at the heart of it. It is about this woman who made a deal with a demon many years ago that she would live a certain amount of time for a reason. We found out the reason why she makes this deal, and she is given a task to hunt down a serial killer. and she's told if she's able to find the serial killer and stop him, then she can make another deal and get her soul back. So really loved this. The sapphic romance is at the center of it as much as the murder mystery is, so highly recommend. Short novella. Really enjoyed this. I can't say enough about it. So that is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polka. Nope. Next, Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. This is such a strange one, and I put it here in the random speculative because it combines so many disparate elements to make a whole. So it is fantasy in that one of the main characters, she's made a deal with the devil to give the devil 7 souls, but she gives them she's a violin instructor, and she gives them enough instruction to make them incredibly great at what they do, and then she has to give their souls to the devil. Then our main character, Katrina, is a trans runaway who plays the violin and runs into the orbit of Shizuka, and Shizuka, Katrina would be her final soul to give to the devil. But then we also follow this character, this alien woman, refugee, who is on Earth. She's a refugee, and she opens a donut shop, and she and Shizuka kind of fall for each other. So has all these elements that come together in a way that just works for me. I know it doesn't work for a lot of people, but it really worked for me, so I really loved this. And that is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. And let me put up here. And finally, I have The Way Spring Arrives and Other Stories. This is a collection of translated short stories, essays, novellas from female and non-binary creators in China. So there are a lot of great stories in this. I tabbed each individual story, so there's a really good amount of them. And it's just great to have different voices and different types of stories, and to experience a subculture in a country where we have this perception that, or we don't have a perception of what the subculture is like. So I really enjoyed this for what it is. It's a beautiful cover. So I highly recommend this if you want to expand your translated reading, if you want to expand your short story reading. So really great collection. So that is The Way Spring Arrives and Other Stories. So that's all I've got. Completely lost the sun. This light is awful. So thank you for watching. I hope you found something to put on your TBR. If there's anything on here that you highly recommend, would love to hear about it. If you just want to yell about your favorite books in this list, I will totally hear that too. And if there's any queer, speculative, sci-fi, fantasy, speculative, whatever you would like to recommend, I would love to get some recommendations too. So thanks for watching, and happy Pride Month, everybody.